Good afternoon, and welcome to this presentation, Building to Grow, Early Knights of Columbus Headquarters Sites. On behalf of the Knights of Columbus Museum, thank you for joining this session, which is one in a weekly series of online programs for the benefit of our museum patrons. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the museum's YouTube and Facebook accounts. An email message will be sent to all registrants providing video links and information. A few additional notes. The Knights of Columbus Museum remains closed while we wait for the end of the COVID-19 closure. For information about the museum and its events and offerings, please visit kofcmuseum.org or follow the museum on social media channels at KOFC Museum. During the session, you may submit questions at any point using the questions utility. I will address a selection of the questions to our presenter in the Q&A session following the talk. The talk should last approximately 40 minutes. Now, as a preface to this presentation, it's important to pay tribute to Father Michael McGivney, who founded the Knights of Columbus in 1882. The eldest child of Irish immigrants living in Waterbury, Connecticut, Michael pursued studies for the priesthood and was ordained in 1877. He established the Knights of Columbus from the basement of St. Mary's Church in New Haven, where he was assigned when he was not quite 30 years old. He died just 8 years later in 1890, but the organization he founded has expanded internationally and eclipsed 2 million members. Founded on the principles of charity and unity, the Knights of Columbus has extended its outreach worldwide, but has always remained headquartered in the Elm City. Yesterday, May 27th, Pope Francis formally recognized a miracle at Father McGivney's intercession, which gives way to the founder's beatification, predictably later this year. This is a significant step on the road to sainthood. Providentially, next week's webinar was planned on Father McGivney. Yesterday's announcement came as a surprise, but the topic will hopefully be of interest. Please watch for registration information about that session. Father McGivney's legacy, the Knights of Columbus, is certainly still active in New Haven, and though it has called many locations home during its 138 years, it remains a prominent part of the city. Today's presenter, Vivian Lee Solik, also led last week's session. She is the Knights of Columbus Supreme Council Archivist and holds an MA in American Studies from the George Washington University and an MS in Library and Information Science with an Archives concentration from Simmons University. Vivian Lee, together with our colleague Tiffany Locke, curated a museum exhibition on the headquarters building that the Knights of Columbus currently uses to commemorate its 50th anniversary. So you will benefit from her research this afternoon. Vivian Lee, I turn the session over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and welcome everyone who is joining us remotely. Let me share my screen. And I'd like to offer a note about materials that you will see in today's webinar. Unless otherwise noted on the slides, all documents are from the Knights of Columbus Supreme Council Archives. All photographs are from the Knights of Columbus Multimedia Archives, and all three-dimensional objects are from the Knights of Columbus Museum. In 1882, as Peter mentioned, the Knights of Columbus held its initial organizational meetings in the basement of St. Mary's Church, seen here in this slide. Founded to meet the needs of immigrants, refugees, and families suffering from the death of a breadwinner, the Knights began as a fraternal benefit society and has grown into a worldwide financial and charitable organization. For those who are unfamiliar with where New Haven is located, we are between New York City and Hartford, Connecticut, the state capital, We're right here, right on the coast. In the map on the right, you see the current headquarters at 1 Columbus Plaza. And over the 138 years of its existence, the Knights have occupied 7 different buildings in downtown New Haven, and all are within a 0.6 of a mile radius, or the area enclosed by that oval. With each significant milestone in the growth of membership and insurance in force, the Knights have needed a larger headquarters. More members, more insurance in force means more staff, more work to be done, and hence the need for larger buildings. This map depicts the location of each of the 7 headquarters and illustrates how close to one another they were. And you can see the key on the left and the numbers corresponding to the buildings on the map. So let's take a look at the first headquarters. As an all-volunteer organization, the Knights of Columbus needed an economical solution for its first office. Its first office was in the back office of a founding member, Cornelius Driscoll. Driscoll offered space in his law office, which he shared with his partner, Adolph Asher, an active member and leader of New Haven's Jewish community. Asher had clerked with Driscoll and then went to Driscoll's alma mater, Yale, to study for and receive his law degree. Upon its completion, Driscoll asked Asher to go into practice with him. The offices of Driscoll and Asher were located in the Powell Building at 157 Church Street, conveniently located right beside City Hall. And in this image, the Powell Building is the small 3-story building with a blue arrow over it, and City Hall is the large building to its left. And here's a detail that gives you a closer look at the Powell Building. In December of 1883, Columbiad, the magazine of the Knights of Columbus, reported that Supreme Knight James T. Mullen was authorized to negotiate a lease for new offices. He was successful and found office space on the 4th or top floor of the Hoadley Building, which you see here. And the Knights would occupy this space from 1884 to 1896. Designed by the firm of Henry Austin and Son, the Hoadley Building was built in 1872. This illustration depicts the Hoadley Building circa 1889. Today, we would call the Hoadley Building a multi-use building with shops on the ground floor and a variety of businesses above, including dentists, lawyers, insurance agents, and other professionals. Moving on to the third headquarters, it was also located in leased space. In the fall of 1896, a 5-year lease for space in the Powell Building was signed, and the building included a large movie theater on the ground floor and numerous offices above. Again, what we might call a multi-use building. The Knights office was in rooms 98 and 100 on the 5th floor, which is indicated by the blue arrows, and the rent was $550 per year, or approximately $16,525 in today's money, accounting for inflation. And this image is taken from a postcard of the Powell Theater, dated circa 1890 to 1899. There seems to be some debate about how the building owner's name is pronounced. Some pronounce it Powell, as I have been, and some pronounce it Powley. So if there are any native New Haveners watching and you can shed some light on how to pronounce this local family name, please be sure to leave a comment in the chat box with how you pronounce the name. We would appreciate it. Now here you can see the signature page for the lease between the Knights of Columbus and Sylvester Z. Powell, dated October 30, 1896, for the offices in the Powell Building. This is the only existing lease for a national headquarters of the Knights of Columbus. And in the lower right corner, you'll see the signatures, And from top to bottom, they are Supreme Knight John J. Phelan, Supreme Secretary Daniel Caldwell, and the building owner Sylvester Z. Hoadley. So after operating in leased spaces for its first 22 years, the Knights of Columbus found themselves seeking a new home in 1904. The Supreme Council, then called the National Council, approved the expenditure of $250,000 to construct a new purpose-built headquarters at 956 Chapel Street. Today's equivalent cost would be over $7.2 million. This new headquarters was to be a multi-purpose building with tenants on the ground and second floors, and offices on the third and fourth floors. And here we see a copy of the board vote on May 17, 1904, approving the construction of the new headquarters and the expenditure as it appears in the archives. Now, a competition was held to select the architect for the new headquarters. The call for the competition ran on page 16 of the February 1904 Columbiad, the official magazine of the Knights of Columbus, and that's the image that you see on the left. A booklet titled Program of Competition for the Selection of an Architect for a National Headquarters Building at New Haven, Connecticut, was printed and distributed, and that's the image on the right. Unfortunately, the archives does not have any other designs for the building because, according to the booklet, all unsuccessful designs were to be returned to the architects and builders. The building committee selected John Lyman Faxon to design the headquarters building. Faxon had studied architecture and engineering, at Massachusetts Institute of Technology in 1873 and 74. By 1876, he was an architect in partnership with his maternal uncle, J. Warren Faxon. By 1878, he had opened his own practice in an office on Exchange Street, Boston. Faxon was a member of the Boston Society of Architects and the Boston Art Club. Now, Faxon was a devoted follower of Henry Hobson Richardson, and Faxon's churches exhibit the stylistic influences of H.H. Richardson, as he's commonly called. Richardson and Faxon adapted the monumental style of Romanesque architecture to late 19th century America. They introduced the warm tones of New England granite and sandstone in a new style appropriate to the industrial age. On this slide, we see from top left, Rawlins Chapel at Dartmouth College, which was built in 1885, the First Congregational Church of Detroit, built in 1891, and on the bottom, the East Boston High School, located in Boston, and this was built in 1901. The top two church buildings in this slide were designed in the Richardsonian Romanesque style, typical of most of Faxon's work. The bottom image, the East Boston High School, is built in a very different architectural style, the Renaissance Revival style. Now, one of the interesting things about the design of the fourth headquarters, which you see on the right, is that it is not in the Richardsonian Romanesque style, but it too is built in the Renaissance Revival style, like the East Boston High School. The fourth headquarters is a classic Renaissance Revival style building. It is constructed of a light colored stone with a flat roof and a symmetrical, austere facade, which differentiates it from the arches, towers, and warm sandstone of the Richardsonian Romanesque style of Faxon's other work. If you notice, the second floor window treatment Faxon used on the Knights of Columbus headquarters, again on the right, is very similar to what he did with the windows on the second floor of the East Boston High School. One of the specifications for the new headquarters was that there would be tenants in the building. Stores were to occupy the ground floor, and the second and third floors would be divided into, quote, suitable offices to rent to doctors, dentists, and other professional people. The third floor would also contain a lodge room of suitable size for the use of several local councils of the Knights of Columbus. With much fanfare, the fourth headquarters was dedicated on June 6, 1906, during the National Convention and General Reunion, now called the Supreme Convention. It was featured on the cover of the July 1906 Columbiad, which is seen here on the left. On the top right is a delegate badge for the 1906 convention, which features an image of the headquarters. On the lower right is one of several souvenir plates in the collection of the museum, and it features the new headquarters. This plate was created by the Vaudreuil pottery manufacturer, and the artist was W.M. Campbell. And here are two additional photos of the building, all decorated with bunting and lights for its dedication at the National Convention and General Reunion. Because this was the first purpose-built headquarters for the Knights of Columbus, the accounting for the project was very important. In February 1907, Supreme Knight Edward L. Hearn placed an accounting of the building cost on the cover of the magazine. He noted in the notes above the actual accounting statement, which is the bottom half of the image, he noted that the management of the building was put in the hands of William M. Gary, manager of the supply department, to ensure, quote, the conservative and economical management of the building desired by the national officers. Now, the fourth headquarters is the only early headquarters building that is still standing. The historic photos may make it seem like a large, imposing structure, but as this modern street view shows, the building actually has a smaller, more humanistic scale. And I apologize that we're sort of looking up at the image, but it was very hard to get a straight-on view of the building. So by the 1920 annual Supreme Council meeting, the order had once again outgrown its headquarters. Between 1917 and 1922, membership had more than doubled, and the Knights' popular post-World War I educational activities required additional space. The board of directors was directed, quote, to acquire a site for and proceed with construction and equipment of a new home office building in New Haven. The new building at 45 Wall Street also was designed to accommodate the printing and mailing of Columbia magazine. And this is the first time that this work is done inside the headquarters building, because previously it was done off-site by a contractor. The architect selected to design the fifth headquarters was William P. Guggles, purchasing agent for the Knights of Columbus. And in this slide, you see the building on the left, and I've pulled out an extract of the signatures in the lower right. So you can see Guggles as architect and the George A. Fuller Company as the builder. Now, Guggles had served with the New York Infantry during the Spanish-American War, and in August of 1918, the World War I draft law was changed, and all men 18 to 45 were now required to register for the draft. Guggles was 45 in September of 1918 when he signed his draft registration card, which is seen here. Guggles was not inducted into the armed forces, but he did serve in another way. He designed all the Knights of Columbus huts or recreation buildings in Army camps and naval stations across the country. At the time of his death in 1929, he was the national purchasing agent in charge of buildings and equipment for the Knights of Columbus. Now, the contractor for the fifth headquarters was George A. Fuller. And Fuller often is credited with being the inventor of modern skyscrapers and the modern contracting system. He studied architecture at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, graduated in 1872, and then went to work for Peabody and Stearns in New York. In 1880, Fuller moved to Chicago, where he established the George A. Fuller Company. And it was here that he started a new approach to building. He had architects from other firms handle the aesthetic design of the building, and he managed the construction of the designs. That role is what would become accepted as the role of the general contractor. The Fuller Company had offices in New York, Washington, Philadelphia, Chicago, Los Angeles, Boston, Toronto, and Montreal. He worked with some of the leading architects of the day, including Henry Bacon, Cass Gilbert, John Russell Pope, McKim, Mead and White, Holabird and Roche, and Albert Kahn. His projects are extensive, and they include the Lincoln Memorial, the United States Supreme Court Building, the National Archives, the Department of Justice, the Federal Reserve Board, the Department of the Interior Building, and the Daughters of the American Revolution's Constitution Hall. All of those buildings, of course, are in Washington, D.C. He had state contracts to build Capitol buildings for West Virginia, Louisiana, and Maine. He also built the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Marshall Field offices in Chicago, and numerous commissions for offices, banks, universities, churches, clubs, railroad stations and roundhouses, and industrial buildings. What's interesting is that Goggolz and the Fuller Company may have first worked together during World War I, because the Fuller Company built Camp Funston, part of Fort Riley near Junction City, Kansas, where the Knights of Columbus had a hut or recreation center. And you can see in this image, this is a listing of the Fuller Company works, and the Knights of Columbus headquarters was listed under clubs and fraternal buildings, and that's highlighted by the blue arrow. In 1922, with the opening of the 5th headquarters at 45 Wall Street, the Supreme Secretary published an illustrated report on the new headquarters, and it provides a wonderful glimpse into what the interior of the building was like. Here is the cover of the report and images of some of the offices. In the center top, we have the Office of the Supreme Knight, and below that, the Division of Correspondence, which is, at the time, was considered a general office. And then on the right, at the top, you have the Division of Membership Records, and below that, the Division of Insurance Records, again, all part of the General Office Division. By 1950, the continued growth of the order warranted yet another move to an even larger building. You're seeing the theme. As the order grows, the headquarters need to be bigger. Initially, the Knights wanted to build a purpose-built building, as the two buildings before it, headquarters number 4 and headquarters number 5, were. However, due to federal government restrictions and material shortages caused by the Korean War, this plan was scrapped. Instead, the Knights chose to purchase and renovate the yellow building that you see here, so named because of the pale yellow bricks used in its construction. And here is a brick salvaged from the demolition of the 6th headquarters, the so-called yellow building. And as you can see, it is a very soft, pale yellow, not a bright yellow color, which the name might lead you to believe it was. Located at 71 Meadow Street, the yellow building was the former home of the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. The top left postcard is when the building was still the railroad offices, and the bottom right postcard is once it had become the home of the Knights of Columbus. And the site is the location of the current New Haven Police Department headquarters building. The architect for the original construction of the Yellow Building was William H. Allen, and the contractor was George M. Grant, a local mason and builder. Allen, a native of Northampton, Massachusetts, moved to New Haven circa 1867 and spent most of his adult life here in New Haven, where he designed hundreds of houses and other buildings. From left to right, you see Allen's personal home at 357 Whitney Avenue, his Beaux-Arts design with Richard Williams for the New Haven County Courthouse in the middle, and the Plymouth Congregational Church at 1469 Chapel Street. The design for the county courthouse won a design competition over submissions from several well-known architects. And the building, erected in 1914, prominently faces the New Haven Green and is still in use today. Several of Allen's works are individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Many others are contributing buildings in New Haven's National Register listed Whitney Avenue Historic District and other historic districts. Now, before the Knights of Columbus could move into the Yellow Building, it needed to be renovated. And the renovations were overseen by J. Gerald Phelan, a Knight, and nephew of past Supreme Knight John J. Phelan. Phelan was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and received his architectural training from Pratt Institute in New York. And after he graduated, he worked for 2 years as a designer for A.C. Kelly and Company in Bridgeport. He then joined the Bridgeport engineering firm of Fletcher Thompson in 1916 as a draftsman and worked his way up to managing principal in 1931. He later became the firm's president and served in that capacity until his retirement in 1970. At his retirement, his son, John G. Phelan, actually John Gerald Phelan Jr., took over as president of the firm, while Phelan Sr. stayed as chairman of the board. Phelan was a longtime member of the American Institute of Architects, a member of its College of Fellows, and he served as president of the Connecticut chapter of the AIA between 1942 and 1943. He served on the Connecticut State Architectural Examining Board, which is responsible for the examination and registration of all architects practicing in the state. In 1969, Phelan was awarded a Doctor of Arts honorary degree from Fairfield University. He also was awarded the Alumnus of the Year award from the Pratt Institute, which, to honor him, created the J. Gerald Phelan Award for Architecture, granted annually to an outstanding architecture student who was interested in serving the needs of the profession and community. Phelan's works included a number of churches in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, and at least 10 buildings for Fairfield University and 3 buildings for Seton Hall University. Now here's the site plan for the 6th headquarters, and if you notice, inside the L of the building, there is a circular drive in what is technically the back of the building, since the building's address was 71 Meadow Street, the street on the left side of the image. Here is a floor plan for the 2nd floor of the building. This set of floor plans was used to assign space to different officers and departments. The archives holds plans for 4 floors, but does not have a plan for the basement, which housed the printing presses on which Columbia and other materials were printed. And the insert on the right is a detail of the 2nd floor, and it includes the offices for the Supreme Knight and the Supreme Secretary, as well as an office for visiting Supreme officers, which is highlighted by the blue oval. Now, prior to this time, the Supreme Knight and other Supreme officers did not all live and work in New Haven. In fact, many of them did not. At the 1953 Supreme Convention, when Luke E. Hart was elected Supreme Knight, He told the delegates he would move to New Haven and work from the Supreme headquarters. The other Supreme officers followed suit, and this marks a new phase in the corporate development of the home office operations. Hart not only worked at the Yellow Building, but he also lived there. He had been widowed in 1951, and he had an apartment on the top floor of the headquarters building. A light in his window was often seen burning late into the night as he worked in his apartment. The newly renovated 6th headquarters was dedicated on January 16, 1953, by Bishop Henry J. O'Brien of Hartford, and here is the program for the opening. Additionally, when the building opened, a booklet was printed for the dedication that contained photographs of various departments, officers, and features of the new building, and here's the cover for that publication. Like we saw earlier, this booklet has many images that give us wonderful insight into what the building looked like on the inside. The photo on the left is the state-of-the-art switchboard, which it takes great pains to point out is a state-of-the-art switchboard. On the right is the lobby with the World War I service plaque and a bust of Christopher Columbus. This bust of Columbus still graces the lobby of the current headquarters building. The World War I memorial plaque with members who served and made the ultimate sacrifice now is in the courtyard at the Knights of Columbus Museum. And here on the left, we see the department that handled council accounts. And the image on the right captures the workspace of the Information Technology Department, or what passed for information technology in 1953. Here on the left, we see the Supreme Knight's office, and on the right is the room dedicated to the museum. Now, as the order continued to grow, demands on the printing plant in the basement of the 6th headquarters also grew. In addition to printing for the Knights of Columbus, the printing plant also produced jobs for area Catholic schools, religious orders, and churches. And in 1955, the Knights constructed a printing plant across the street from headquarters, and the blue arrow and the dotted line indicate where the building would be built. And of course, the building in the foreground, the big L-shaped building with the parking spaces in front of it, is the 6th headquarters building. The location of the 7th and current headquarters is approximately where the Gold Star is. Now, 3 years after it was newly renovated and dedicated, on May 4th, 1956, the stretch of Union Avenue behind the headquarters building was renamed Columbus Plaza. And here we see the crowd gathered in the circular drive with the speaker's rostrum draped with bunting on the left. This image captures the actual ribbon cutting for the newly named Columbus Plaza. Mayor Richard C. Lee, a member of the Knights of Columbus, is under the left blue arrow, and Supreme Knight Lukey Hart is highlighted by the blue arrow on the right. And here we see Mayor Lee on the left and Supreme Knight Hart on a platform to place in position the first of 4 markers which designated Columbus Plaza. It's interesting that when the headquarters moved to the current location, the name Columbus Plaza moved with it, even though the building's physical address is on the corner of Church and George Streets. Now, as we wrap up the 6th headquarters, I wanted to share this fun photo which captures how office furnishings, files, etc. were moved out of the building. When the Knights moved into the Meadow Street building, they knew it was a stopgap measure. Remember, they couldn't construct the building they needed and wanted due to shortages caused by the Korean War. As early as 1962, New Haven Redevelopment Agency officials were corresponding with the Knights of Columbus on the creation of a new headquarters within city limits. These conversations ramped up in late 1964 when Mayor Lee introduced architect Kevin Roche to the Knights of Columbus and Supreme Knight John McDevitt. McDevitt recognized that the Meadow Street headquarters no longer met the requirements for providing exceptional services to the members. In a letter to employees dated April 14, 1965, Supreme Knight McDevitt acknowledged that the current headquarters were at capacity and almost unsafe for employees, further heightening the need for a new building. On the same day, McDevitt held a joint press conference with Mayor Lee and Kevin Roche to announce that the Knights would build a new headquarters in New Haven. And here we see that new headquarters that was built, the 7th headquarters at 1 Columbus Plaza. And in conclusion, I would like to share this photo of the current headquarters, headquarters number 7. And it was taken 2 weeks ago, and it captures the flyover of the Connecticut National Guard to honor our heroes during this pandemic. Wherever the Knights of Columbus have called home in New Haven, they have stayed true to the vision of Father Michael J. McGivney, their founder, and have striven to live the 4 pillars of knighthood: charity, unity, fraternity, and patriotism. As a reminder, if you missed last week's webinar on the 7th headquarters, and as Paul Harvey would say, you would like to hear the rest of the story, I invite you to view it on the Knights of Columbus Museum's YouTube channel or Facebook. Thank you for joining us today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Vivian Lee, thank you as well. And excuse me, I apologize for my raspy voice. I would also like to point out, I failed to do so at the outset of the webinar, that Vivian Lee has shared 2 handouts that can be found and downloaded in the handout section. Now, these are 2 that she had provided to attendees of last week's presentation. So if you did not attend or failed to download them, do take the occasion to do so today. So I'll invite additional questions. Vivian Lee, I do have a few to begin.
Okay.
If anyone who would like to use the questions utility and just type your question in. Vivian Lee, has or does the Knights of Columbus maintain offices in any other cities?
We have had an office in Washington, D.C., and we still have a presence there, of course, with the St. John Paul II Shrine. Before Luke Hart started working in New Haven, officers they basically worked from home like we're doing today. So technically you could say there was a remote office. For example, Supreme Knight John Swift lived in Boston. But in terms of official headquarters, there's the one in New Haven and then the one in DC.
Thank you. Which of the headquarters buildings was occupied for the longest duration and which for the shortest?
I would have to go back and look. I believe that the first was the shortest. That was only a couple years. And it's either going to be the 4th or 5th building that we were in the longest. And that information actually, if someone is interested in the specific dates, look at the exhibit handout, because that will have the dates that we were in each of the buildings.
Thank you. And then how has the city of New Haven changed either in design or layout expansion since the Knights of Columbus was founded?
The short answer is greatly. Of course, where we are in the 7th headquarters, that's, as I understand it, the end of what was known as Long Wharf. And a lot of the area from our current headquarters out to the Sound today is actually reclaimed. You know, obviously, a lot more skyscrapers, if you will, in New Haven, even though they're not 40, 50 plus floors, there are still a lot of taller buildings in New Haven today than there would have been when our first and second headquarters were occupied. And that's because of the changes in architecture and technology, building construction, that have allowed for these taller buildings to be built.
And then this is a question that I think you may have addressed in your presentation last week. How close is the Knights of Columbus headquarters to the church where Father McGivney founded the organization?
It's only, what, 2 or 3 blocks? It's not far away at all. And when you think of it, 6/10 of a mile, that's just a little bit over half a mile in which all of the headquarters buildings are located. They've always remained pretty much around the green, to where we are today. We're just a couple blocks off the New Haven Green. So very much in the heart of downtown New Haven.
And for those unfamiliar with New Haven, the Green would be the equivalent of Central Park, I guess, of the city of New Haven. And we can also point out, Vivian Lee, that the Knights of Columbus Museum is only a block removed from the present headquarters that you have pictured as well.
Correct.
So I'll wait just another moment to see if there are any additional questions. We're grateful for everyone's submissions and certainly for their interest in this topic. The Knights of Columbus has a long legacy in New Haven, and to think that in that duration of time, they have occupied as many as 7 buildings, some of them for 50 years or more, is quite significant.
And it's interesting when you look at the architects that they've selected, the buildings are sort of a mini survey of American architectural history. Perhaps not intended by those who were selecting the architects, but it's interesting to look back and to see the style of the buildings and how they represent the leading styles at the time they were built.
Indeed. Well, I think that's going to do it. And I'm very grateful again, Vivian Lee, for the research you've done and for compiling them and sharing this information with our viewers. As a reminder, this session was recorded, and the session will be available in video opportunity for on-demand viewing. Vivian Lee indicated that her previous presentation is available on YouTube and on Facebook, both the Knights of Columbus accounts, and this one will be as well. I will send a follow-up email message to everyone who registered, both those who were able to attend as well as some who may unfortunately have missed it for whatever reason, so that they can enjoy it and even share it with others. So we thank you again for your attendance, and until next week, we wish you good health and God bless.